July 1978, a Soviet air defense controller traced a blip streaking over 80,000 feet at Mach 3.2. By the time the order reached MiG-25 pilots at Monchegorsk, the SR-71 Blackbird had crossed 165 nautical miles further. Soviet pilots scrambled, engines roaring, but cockpit instruments told the truth. Interception was already impossible. The Blackbird's escape was sealed before the chase even began. How could so many interceptors lose before ever taking off? On May 1, 1960, a U-2 spy plane flown by France's Gary Powers was struck by a Soviet SA-2 surface-to-air missile at 70,000 feet over Sverdlovsk. The world watched as the myth of untouchable altitude vanished overnight. In Washington, the shock ran deep. The United States halted deep penetration flights and demanded a new kind of reconnaissance aircraft, one that could survive in the densest air defense belts the Cold War would ever see. Lockheed's Skunk Works answered with a jet that would redraw what was possible. The SR-71 Blackbird first flew in December 1964, entering service in 1966. Its design was shaped by the lessons of the U-2's fall, speed and altitude layered with early stealth. The Blackbird cruised at Mach 3.2, nearly 2,100 miles per hour, at altitudes between 80,000 and 85,000 feet. Its titanium skin withstood frictional heating that would have destroyed any other airframe. Paul Crickmore, a leading SR-71 historian, describes the Blackbird's performance as an order of magnitude beyond anything the Soviets could field in the 1960s. The Soviet response was urgent. Their air defense forces, the PVO, scrambled to adapt. The MiG-25 Foxbat, first flown in 1964 and introduced in numbers by 1969, was built for speed above all else. On paper, the Foxbat could dash to Mach 2.8 and even touch Mach 3 in short bursts and reach heights near 75,000 feet. But these numbers came with limits. Prolonged high-speed runs risked engine failure, and each climb drained fuel at a punishing rate. By the mid-1970s, the Blackbird's missions traced to the edges of Soviet territory. Flights from RAF Mildenhall skirted the Barents and Baltic coasts, gathering intelligence on submarine pens, radar sites, and missile fields. Soviet radar operators knew what was at stake. Any unidentified track at extreme speed and altitude triggered the highest alert. Interceptor regiments at Monchegorsk and Domodedovo stood ready, waiting for the signal that would send pilots skyward in pursuit. Yet for all the Foxbat's brute power, the gap remained. The SR-71 combination of sustained Mach 3 cruise and 80,000-foot altitude meant that, from the moment of detection, every second mattered. The defenders faced a problem that was no longer about courage or readiness, but about physics. As Crickmore notes, the Blackbird's operational envelope forced Soviet planners to rethink interception from the ground up. The challenge was now a race against time and distance, one that the Blackbird was engineered to win. Barlock radar stations stretched across the Soviet north, their operators trained to spot anything moving fast and high. On a typical SR-71 Blackbird mission, the first radar return appeared at a range of 200 to 300 kilometers, barely a blip at the edge of the scope, but enough to trigger the highest alert. Within seconds, a chain reaction began. The radar operator snapped a landline open and relayed the track to the Sector Operations Center. Every step added seconds, verification, confirmation, a supervisor's nod. The report moved up the command ladder from local sites to the regional command post and then to the Air Defense Operations Center. Each relay, whether voice, teletype, or automated link, introduced delay. In practice, 3 to 7 minutes passed between the first radar contact and the moment an order reached a quick reaction alert base. At Monchegorsk and Domodedovo, pilots on alert heard the shrill bell, then the voice over the loudspeaker. Crews scrambled from ready rooms, running through the snow or across the tarmac, strapping into cockpits as ground crews pulled safety pins and checked missile arming switches. Aircraft sat fueled and armed, engines preheated in the Arctic cold. But even with this preparation, the scramble sequence followed a rigid script. Avionics checks, engine start, weapons systems online, each step compressed but none skipped. Taxi to the runway, final clearance from ground control, then afterburners lit and wheels up. From the instant the alert sounded, the stopwatch ran. Western analysts reconstructed the total reaction time. In the best cases, 16 minutes elapsed from the first radar paint to the moment a MiG-25 left the runway. This was not a formal regulation, but a sum of real-world delays, human, mechanical, procedural. In those 16 minutes, the SR-71 at Mach 3.2 covered more than 900 kilometers, crossing entire regions before a single interceptor was airborne. Controllers at the Sector Operations Center worked intercept math in real time, calculating vectors and lead points with slide rules and plotting boards. But the geometry was already slipping away. The Blackbird's ground track stretched ahead, and every minute lost on the ground meant the intercept window narrowed. The numbers told a hard truth. Even flawless execution could not recover the minutes lost to detection and command relay. The chase began with the target already vanishing over the horizon. MiG-25 pilots launched into the sky with a single priority: reach altitude as fast as the airframe would allow. The initial climb rate approached 50,000 feet per minute, engines locked in full afterburner from the moment the wheels left the runway. Every second at maximum thrust burned through precious fuel, but there was no alternative. The intercept profile demanded a steep, punishing ascent, pushing both machine and crew to the edge of their limits. At 67,000 feet, the Foxbat ceiling, the jet could barely sustain its speed. The cockpit shook with vibration as thin air starved the engines, and the fuel gauge spun downward. Crews knew from experience that after the zoom climb, their time on station was measured in minutes, often less than 3 minutes, before the tanks ran dry. Maintenance chiefs tracked every sortie, logging engine cycles and heat stress. Each climb risked shortening the life of the turbines, but the orders were clear: get to altitude no matter the cost. For ground crews, the aftermath was a race to strip and inspect the engines, hunting for signs of overheating or compressor stall. Pilots felt the pressure in the air and on the ground, knowing that every climb squeezed Foxbat endurance to the limit. As the MiG-25 leveled off, the Blackbird was already receding at Mach 3. The engagement window had narrowed to a sliver, barely enough time to lock on, let alone fire. In the cockpit, the realization began to set in. The battle was ending before it could even begin. Cockpit instruments told the truth before the mind could catch up. MiG-25 pilots, leveled off at altitude, watched the range numbers stubbornly refuse to shrink. The target marker for the SR-71 Blackbird slid steadily away on the scope, not toward them. Airspeed held at the edge of what the Foxbat could endure, engines straining, but the Blackbird was already pulling ahead at nearly Mach 3.2, 80,000 feet above the Earth. Every instruction from ground control grew more frantic. Vectors shifted, intercept points were recalculated, but the geometry never improved. The gap only widened. Weapons officers checked missile systems, but the launch envelope for the R-40 missile was unforgiving. At these heights, the missile brochure listed a range of 50 kilometers, but that meant little. In the thin air, energy bled away before a missile could ever reach a target moving nearly as fast as itself. The firing solution existed in manuals, but not in the sky. Even the newer R-33, carried by MiG-31 aircraft, could only close the distance in a perfect head-on shot. Any deviation, any delay, and the window vanished. Major Mikhail Miyagi later described the tension of these moments. The alarm with its shrill bell, the scramble to the aircraft, the nervous voices flooding the radios. Procedures, he said, were computed down to the last second, but always felt inadequate against the speed and altitude of the SR-71 Blackbird. The cockpit would fill with the glow of the radar display, the symbol for attack lighting up, but by then the American jet was already on its return loop, slipping out of reach. The realization settled in quietly. The outcome was not in their hands. Even flawless execution could not change the math. By the time the interceptors arrived, the Blackbird was already gone. Today, the balance between detection and response still defines air defense. Hypersonic platforms push that gap wider with every breakthrough. The SR-71 showed that sometimes speed renders the question of interception obsolete. Adversaries were left to watch, calculate, and realize that some targets are gone before the chase even begins.